So greetings and welcome to today's educational program, the Managing for Quality Lecture Series number 5, Understanding Japanese Style Strategy Management by Dr. Gregory H. Watson. This is your moderator, Doug Wood, with ASQ's Quality Management Division. So we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Dr. Gregory H. Watson. Join me in welcoming him to our talk. Dr. Watson has degrees in management, law, and industrial engineering. He's an 18-year ASQ Fellow and past chair from the year 2000. He received the ASQ Distinguished Service Medal plus the Lancaster, Crosby, and Ishikawa medals. He's been named an honorary member in 17 national quality associations. Dr. Watson delivered speeches to 20 or more ASQ national and divisional conferences, twice for the Quality Management Division. A former quality executive with Hewlett-Packard, Compaq Computer, and Xerox, and he has coached executives in quality transformations at Nokia Mobile Phones in 93 to 99, Toshiba from 99 to 2001, ExxonMobil from 01 to 02, and over 20 other companies. He's the only Westerner to be awarded a Deming Medal by the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers, the W. Edwards Deming Award for Dissemination and Promotion overseas in 2009. And incidentally, just recently, the ASQ board elected him as an honorary member of ASQ. And so without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gregory H. Watson. Greg, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Tonight we're going to talk about understanding Japanese style quality strategy management. And this is a follow-on from the last lecture which we had, which talked about the concept of strategic planning and strategic quality planning. My career has been very tightly coupled with the Japanese development of quality since the early 1980s, and I've been very closely linked to the Japanese quality leaders. And what I'd like to do is begin in this first part of this presentation to talk about the scientific method, because I believe very much that we have to focus quality both as quality science and also in terms of quality application on the human side. So the scientific method is a constant pursuit to challenge the status quo, or what we might call settled knowledge, and it's to discover the unknown unknowns in our world. When we think about the scientific discovery process, we see we're advancing from like an educated guess, or we think that's interesting type of idea. We call that a research hypothesis, to developing a theory that's evolving by a structured process which is evidence-based. So we're advancing science as our measurement systems improve. So scientific observation is a method to acquire knowledge and predict the way things are going to operate in the future. So it's a probabilistic estimate based on our observations. So there's two components to the systematic observation and then rigorous skepticism to doubt these things and only believe that when we can prove this phenomena, that we have a conjecture, something we think about, if we can falsify its opposite, then we're proving it. So we do these under known controlled conditions, and the conclusions then draw a prediction about future behavior. So scientists are inherently skeptical of the current knowledge, and we're trying to seek new means to develop understanding and observe phenomena in different ways so we can challenge that status quo. So criticism is the backbone of science, and a peer review process or independent replication of experimental results is its lifeblood. So how does science discover new ideas? We've been talking recently in the quality community for the last 3 years about the rise of quality 4.0. And this requires that we start treating quality as a science of controlling and improving productive systems. And when we look at productive systems, we see there are 4 components or 4 elements. There's the technology, both the hardware and the software of the technology. Then there's the human system, and that's the competence and skills of the people involved. Then there's the management system, how we plan and coordinate the execution of that work and the development and allocation of resources. And then there are the cultural values that establish the guiding principles for how we will work together to make the system operate effectively. So a productive system is never settled in the sense that it's always open to expanding as our knowledge expands and we increase this understanding. And so profound knowledge is increased by investigating 4 dimensions. One dimension is the systems approach towards building knowledge. So how do we actually operate our systems? And how do we use that approach to understand how the entire end-to-end process is operating, both the technology side and the human side and the management system side, as well as the cultural values that support it. Second, we have managing the knowledge domains. This is understanding how this system is actually working. So Deming had said it's a theory of knowledge, but actually it's the knowledge management we need to think about. And then Deming had said variation was one of the components in system of profound knowledge, but we actually need to use statistics and predictive analytics to gain our knowledge. So it's not just the existence of variation, it's what we do with it. And then finally, Deming said psychology, but it's actually developing understanding of the human dimension of work and how we can make progress as working together. Now, the Japanese treated learning about quality as a process of scientific discovery. And so the first component of this we would call Nihon-teki, which means Japanese style. And then the next is Hinshitsu Kanri, and that means quality management system. And this occurs in a particular way, and that's Dantotsu Dojo, which means Dantotsu is the best of the best, and Dojo is a place of immersive learning. So it's a disciplined learning approach. And so what we look at when we take a look at this Nihon-teki Hinshitsu Kanri in a Dantotsu Dojo, we see there are different types of dojos or different types of schools of excellence. And so in Japan, there's many sources of knowledge, and different types of quality-related disciplines have originated from different schools. The Union of Japanese Scientists and Engineers has developed total quality management, Hoshin Kanri, strategic planning, and quality function deployment. The Japanese Society for Quality Control has worked on daily management and performance management. The Japanese Quality Circle Association came up with the basic quality tools and quality circles for team-based learning and execution. The Japanese Management Association did training within industries about job performance and job enrichment, job skills, and human resource management. The Institute of Productive Maintenance Technology came up with 5S housekeeping management and also total productive maintenance. And Japanese Standards Association did the quality control certification and quality management certifications. And so we see that in Japan, there have been a wide number of organizations who've been involved in researching and developing different components of this overall Japanese style quality system. Now, I want to begin in the second part here, thinking about the quality contributions of Japanese thought leaders. And when we're thinking about this, I want to go back to a quotation I've used before in this series, and that is that our scientific perspective for studying quality should follow this haiku by Matsubasho. And he said, "Do not seek to follow in the footsteps of the old masters. Instead, seek what these masters sought." And what that means is we shouldn't necessarily use exactly the same tools that the masters used, but we should understand why did they create the tools? What were the circumstances? What were the purposes behind them? And how did they use those to uncover those purposes? And so there's 2 different types of contributions I want to look at. The first comes from the dedicated approach by the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers through their research committee. And these are the contributions that have just been translated into English. It's not all of the contributions. And so we see in 1948, this was founded, and they established a systematic scientific inquiry process. And they built this methodology up through a research committee structure. And that quality methodology has been practiced basically throughout all of Asia. And the Japanese quality way, Hinshitsu Kanri, is the basis for all of the systematic approaches in Japan for managing for quality. Now, many of the big discoveries in quality were created by the JUICE Research Group. And so this was originally established in 1948 when JUICE was founded as the Quality Control Research Group. And it was appointed, the chair of this was Shigeru Mizuno. And we'll see his name coming up a little bit later. The name in 1949 was changed to the QC Research Group, and these are the people who conducted the research. They developed their internal quality management programs, and they ended up teaching quality throughout Japan. And they served as the note takers or translators for the lectures of Deming, Duran, and Drucker. And they also were helping to create those structures in a unique Japanese way, which they first called total quality control, and then they restyled as either company-wide quality control or total quality management. The leader of that group, Shigeru Mizuno, is the one that Dr. Kano credits with simplifying the Shewhart cycle or the Deming wheel into the PDCA control cycle, as they called it. That was in 1949. And this was following the approach that the Japanese Efficiency Society, an organization established in 1912 by Konosuke Matsushita, the founder of Panasonic, as a way of formalizing what Frederick Taylor had come up with in his Principles of Scientific Management just the year before, in 1911. And so they had a three-step process, which was similar to the one that was there from Shewhart. And so they called it plan, do, and then see. And that means see with their eyes, not see as in check. And so the PDCA cycle was meant to harmonize what was in the Efficiency Society with the lessons that were coming from Deming and his approach in terms of making this an improvement cycle. And this PDCA became then the core of all Japanese improvement technologies from 1959 onwards. And what we see is that they had 4 decades from the 1950s onward with this research committee developing their settled knowledge, if you will, through a scientific approach. So the focus of the research was established based on a need that they had to clarify the methodology. The committee leaders, so they had committees that were formed, and that was a well-recognized academic who was responsible for studying the applications in the workplace and developing a theory from that. The members of the research committee were selected from companies who were leading in some of these practices, and their quality leaders were then brought into the committee to create case studies so that the practicality of the application could be seen. And then the summary report would have both the theoretical construct, so that the mind of that application was created, if you will, or the mental model, and then also the application, so people could see the variety of ways you could apply that mental model in organizations. I'm going to share with you now a walk through sort of a series of the discoveries that came out of those processes through the research committees and then through the individual scholars. So each of the research committees, I'm just sharing with you now the English version. So each of these documents that I'll be talking about actually came out in Japanese about 2 to 3 years ahead of time before they were translated into English. And so the first research committee was Quality Function Deployment, and the chairman was Dr. Yoji Akao, and they actually were sponsored by the Japanese Standard Association and JUICE. There were 3 academics and 9 industry people there. So they worked between 1978 and 1988, and their findings were basically the voice of the customer and house of quality types of matrices. It was published in 1990 by Productivity Press. The second one is problem solving, and this is the QC problem solving approach. Kayasuya Hosotani was the chairman, and he was sponsored by JUICE, again 3 academics and 7 from industry. From 84 to 85 they worked, and they came up with a 14-step process for TQC problem solving, which was a very strong approach to actually doing this. This was then published by Productivity Press in 1991. And that goes into much more detail about the different steps and how the tools are applied in problem solving. Yoshio Kondo, through the Japanese Standards Association, did a study on human motivation. There were 2 academics and 7 industry people, and their dates were 1984 to 1988. And they created the new Japanese theory of human motivation. And that theory is based on the idea of getting people so they want to contribute. They're encouraged to contribute to their world. And this was published by 3A Corporation in English in 1991, excuse me. And the next was Hoshin Kanri, and this was edited by Dr. Yoji Akao. It was a study done for the Japanese Standards Association. Again, 3 academics and 5 industry people from 1984 to 1988. And that's the same time period that we were implementing Hoshin Kanri in Hewlett-Packard. And Dr. Akao was also working with us at the same time that he was working with this research committee. And so he asked me actually to write the introduction to this because I was heading up the orientation of that Hewlett-Packard into Hoshin Kanri and also helping to spread it through some sharing agreements with Hewlett-Packard and other companies. So this is a standard approach towards applying Hoshin Kanri, and it is still the best reference. It came out in English in 1991. And then we have cross-functional management, and this is Kenji Kurogane. It's also sponsored by the Japanese Standards Association, 2 academics, 8 industry people, 84 to 88. And this is a standard way to manage cross-functional groups, and it was published by Productivity Press in 1992. And so what we see in all of those, what we see is that there is a strong concentration, almost like a renaissance of quality happening where they were bringing these ideas into the English or public domain through English about the period of time of 1988 to 1992. And so in that period of time, there was a number of different research books coming out. And I think it's interesting that these books are not referenced by any of the American thinkers about quality. They were not included in the Six Sigma body of knowledge. They were not included in the works of Deming or Duran or Feigenbaum or Crosby. And so this is a unique body of knowledge which represents a coherent scientific approach through research to come to an understanding of how does quality work in different aspects. And when taken together, that gives us an overall view of how quality is formed. Now, the person behind much of that was Dr. Kaoru Ishikawa. And we see here there's about 8 different thought leaders. These are the principal ones, I believe. So Mizuno, Taiichi Ohno, Yoshio Kondo, Hitoshi Kume, Kaoru Ishikawa, Shigeo Shingo, Yoji Akao, and Noriaki Kano. So the last 2, Kume and Kano, are still alive and contributing. And these are some of the thought leaders that have made a difference in the next 40 years. So in 1954, the basic textbook that came out was Ishikawa's Introduction to Quality Control. And that started this idea of team-based implementation of improvements and the 7 basic tools and quality circles. In 1974, he consolidated his ideas about quality into a guide to quality control, which was this was one of the first books I was given at Hewlett-Packard in 1983 when I was asked to learn about quality. Ishikawa also then came out with his book, What is Total Quality Control? The Japanese Way, where he was summarizing his lifetime learning about this. And this is giving Western business leaders the idea of the primary principles and constructs in taking this total organization-wide approach to managing for quality. And by 1985, that pretty much summarized the view of what quality was in Japan. 1971, Shigeo Shingo came up with the study of the Toyota production system as an engineering approach to describe how it worked in terms of engineering the flow of operating systems. Shingo in 1985 defined his challenge from Taiichi Ohno on how to perform changeovers on dies in steel machines, stamping machines, and injection molding machines in a single-digit minutes, and how they went on to work on all the different procedures for rapid equipment changeovers. Shingo talked about zero QC as a way to have disciplined daily work management and inspecting quality at the source and performing corrective actions immediately. That was 1986. Shingo talked about non-stock production. So we're talking about Kanban, Pokyoka, as well as SMET in 1988. And so this is about reducing inventory in the system by ending up with a improved methodology as a systematic approach towards continuous improvement. Masaki Amai didn't actually write anything new in his book, but what he did was he collected the wisdom and put it into a marketing text that came out in a way that was very easy for the Western people to understand. And so he was actually bringing into one place the contributions of Ishikawa, Mizuno, and others in terms of how do you think about quality. And that was his basic contribution. He was not related to JUICE or JSQC, so he was a management consultant on the side coming in to create this as an entrepreneurial type approach. And then he updated that book with examples of healthcare and how you apply it on a global basis in different cultures in 1997. So we also see that a Japanese industrial news company took applications of how Shingo's approach to Pokioka, and they had a collection of case studies that was published by Productivity Press in 1988. And now we go back again in 88. This was when Taiichi Ono's book on workplace management, which is the best source, I believe, in terms of understanding daily management systems in the original from Japan. And this is practical guidance on how do you eliminate waste and remove cycle time in the end-to-end workplace. Taiichi Ono also wrote his version of the Toyota production system, which talked about how you take the systems approach, and this describes actually how he built that system up over the 40 years of vice president of manufacturing. And in Japan, sometimes this is called the Ono production system, because it was also taken to other companies in Japan. As he retired, he also became a consultant for a while before he passed away. And finally, Just in Time, where he's talking about an interview with a journalist, and it's explaining the rationale behind this just-in-time thinking and Ono production system. Shigeru Mizuno, who was the head of the research committee, summarized the lessons learned about this company-wide total quality control in his book with that title in 1988, and describing his learning that he'd had in 40 years of that research committee. Mizuno also joined Yoji Ikao, and after Mizuno was passed away, their book on quality function deployment was published in 1994. So this and the research committee report on QFD were the two major contributions that got QFD moving in terms of applications for new product design and translation of quality characteristics into operational characteristics of products and services. Hitoshi Kume wrote his first book, Statistical Methods for Quality Control, and this is an excellent book in terms of understanding the basic application of quality tools at the same time as the Baldrige Award came out. I like this book because it shows how statistical methods can be deployed in the process for understanding how you make improvements happen. And he presents the tools in the structure of the QC story as a construct. And so he has advanced tools included in there, such as ANOVA and regression analysis, in addition to basic tools. So it goes beyond the QC7 toolkit. Kume's second book came out first edition in 1989, the second edition just after 2000. And this is talking about management by quality and how it goes, how organizations in Japan have used the development of quality and the quality function to build a system for Hoshin Kanri and to manage strategic change projects. In here, he has an in-depth study of Yokogawa Hewlett-Packard, the company of Hewlett-Packard that won the Deming Prize in 1981, and Kume was one of the people who was the challenger or helping them as a coach on that process. Hiroyuki Hirano wrote a collection of case studies and implementation guides for implementing just-in-time. This was originally put out by the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers. Excellent, very practical, operational, hands-on concepts, not an overall approach really, but a lot of hands-on concepts. Takahashi Osada came up with the first book on 5S, where he talked about this daily housekeeping discipline. And so he called this organization neatness, cleaning, standardization, and discipline. And he's focusing on engineering and operational practices to deal with this and how you can create a total quality environment in the organization through that application. Hirano moved on, and after his JIT book, he wrote about the 5 pillars of the visual workplace. And so he's talking then about JIT in the first book, and now he's moving on to this concept of the 5 S's and how they operate to create a visual factory. And his method and Osada's were different, but Hirano's became the dominant way that people think about implementing 5S. That was not well accepted when it came into English, so later that year his publisher came out with 5S for operators. And it's condensed, it's easier to understand what's going on there with basically educational learning practices that are coupled with this learning objectives and examples so people can understand it more readily. And Yoshio Kondo, his second book was a compendium of the idea of TQC as an inclusive management system based on humanistic principles. So between the book by TQC by Ishikawa of the Japanese Way, Company-Wide Quality Control by Mizuno, and Company-Wide Quality Control by Kondo, you see the whole concept of how quality management systems are operating to drive performance at all levels of the organization. And then finally, the last individual contributor here was Dr. Kano, who in 1996 talked about, can we extend the lessons from the manufacturing world into the world of the service industry? And so he's extending the same lessons and then saying, we have to do many of the same things that we learned about in manufacturing, also in service industries. So having given that background, let's now take a look at what do we mean by this Japanese style quality management. So I'm going to talk about now Nihon Teki Oshin Kanri. That means Japanese style strategy management. And so let's begin by looking at the Gemba philosophy. So the Gemba philosophy was established by Taiichi Ohno, and he said when he talks about Gemba, it's not just a production workplace, but it's anywhere. And he says, when I talk about Gemba, you can see this Gemba philosophy in the administrative part of the organization. And if you're out there observing the Gemba, do something for the people. Don't just go there and look. Make life better for them. And he observed that if we have insufficient standardization and we don't streamline the process, and we don't have rationalization, we create waste, muda, inconsistency in the flow, mura, and unreasonableness, or lack of cognitive thinking process, or mori, in work procedures and work hours. And that's what then creates the problem. And so as we look at how this came about in organizations, we see that we can take an example of Toyota. And Toyota Motor Company was founded and the guiding principles came up in 1937 by Kichiro Toyota, who was the founder of the Toyota Motor Company. And he said these 5 things. First, be contributive to development of the welfare of the country by working together, regardless of position, and faithfully fulfilling your duties. So we see there's a greater good, it's for society, for the country. Working together, it's this collaborative sense, which teamwork makes a good sense. Faithfully fulfilling your duties, that's following this idea of standardization. Be at the vanguard of the times through endless creativity, inquisitiveness, and pursuit of improvement. So that's the drive for innovation and improvement. Be practical and avoid frivolity. And that's basically saying don't spend any more than you have to. Don't do anything just for pure embellishment, but just focus on the essence of what you need to do. But then he says, be kind and generous. Strive to create a warm, home-like atmosphere. And that's like treating people like they're part of a family. So it's about the feeling of how you deal with the workers. Be reverent or respectful. Show gratitude for things great and small in thought and deed. So be appreciative and demonstrate your appreciation so people feel good about their work. So these are the founding principles. As we take a look in 2001, Fujio Cho, the then president of Toyota Motor Company, has said this has been passed down from generation to generation. And so they compiled a new book in 2001. So you could take this idea more relatively across all of the different cultures and environments in the world, as Toyota has become now if you will, global corporation. And so they said we have two different components. One is continuous improvement. So that's dealing with challenges, taking on the future. Kaizen, about the improvement opportunities. Genichi Genbutsu. So this is on-hands experience. Go to the gemba, understand and how you build. And then they say respect for people. So we make this understanding of others and how we take responsibility to build mutual trust. And then teamwork, so how we work together. And when we look at some of the words, this respect for individuals, as it was originally translated in the Toyota production system, it did not recognize this one kanji character in the middle, which pluralizes from people to respect for humanity. So it's understanding how we as individuals work together in a human context. And the purpose of this work together is to achieve an objective, and that is called wa, which is harmony, peace, or balance. In other words, the organization is operating smoothly. There is no ups and downs. It's a smoothly operating system. So when we take a look at Hoshin Kanri, we start seeing its etymology. So ho means method or form. It's a discipline of soldiering. So it's the second position in kendo, fighting with a sword. And it means ready to engage and fully anticipating what's going to come so you know how to win. Shin is the shiny needle on a compass. So it's illuminated at dark, so you can see where is this north, even on the darkest night when you can't see the stars. And Kanri is a system of management. So when we put it together, Hoshin Kanri is actually an application of Plan, Do, Check, Act to management. So how is this executed? Well, we can take a look at the Toyota management system, and this gives us a good idea. So Toshihiro Horikiri, the founding president of Toyota Engineering Company, exposed the world to the Toyota management system on 2017. And he says, if you just understand the Toyota production system, you don't understand how it all works. Because what happens is there's three systems that are interrelated. So there's the Toyota design system, which is how cars are actually designed and how production systems are designed. It's engineering intensive. There's a Toyota production system, which is actually producing the cars, and it's managing the supply chain, and that's operations intensive. It produces deliverables that go to the Toyota sales system, and the Toyota sales system then gives requirements to the Toyota design system. And the system is specified at multiple levels down below with two parallel systems, a quality assurance system and a cost assurance system. So in each of those elements, we would find as we delve into the Toyota production, the sales system, or design system, both a cost assurance and a quality assurance component. Now what we see is happening here is something called Nemawashi. So Nemawashi is a process of negotiating. What are the targets that we want to achieve, and what are the ends that we're going to meet, or the means that we're going to meet to get to those ends? And Nemawashi is a process of laying a foundation by informally talking to people to gather support and feedback before we make a formal proposal for change or a process. And it literally means preparing a tree to be replanted. So ni is from root. Mawasu is meaning to go around something. So it's carefully digging up the roots of a tree to transplant it to another position. And I think of this actually in terms of bonsai trees and how we carefully move a bonsai tree to a new plant when it's outgrown the root system of the old plants. And when we look at this, we've talked about multiple gemba. So gemba 1 is the productive function. Gemba 2 is the strategic function. And so we see that the managers are managing resource efficiency to assure evaluating flow efficiency. And then there's a negotiation process. And in the workplace, we're managing flow efficiency of the value-added throughput of work. And so total productivity requires teamwork from both of the gembas to be able to negotiate how do we make sure we get the resource results out, or the financial performance, based on the way we've managed and designed the operational performance, the flow efficiency part of the business. So what we start seeing is that there's a cascading, if you will, of the system. So Gemba 3, it's the, if you will, governance function. So it's the guiding principles, the quality mindset, and we're making awareness of our situation internally, externally, and we make sense out of it. So we see the tools like our company values and profound knowledge of where we're going and how we exist in the world. This is driving the business system. And the business system is within an industry, so it's the industry cultural values are added on top, and we have made business assumptions. How will we operate within that industry? And in the company, then we drive this into cross-functional management, and now we have a disciplinary culture we've added. So we've got the marketing culture, the R&D culture, the operations culture, or sales culture, and we're adding now the functional knowledge. And so what we see is that this is now what we mean by Gemba 2. And Gemba 1 is the daily management system. This is where we're doing process management, and that's the local cultural values or process knowledge that's driving the organization. And so we see that there's actually a process that's called catchball. And so catchball, we see management is taking a look at the situation. They say, these are the themes we have to improve. Here are some ideas. They bring them and share them with the senior management team. They establish priorities. They bounce it down to the middle management team. What projects do we need to do to achieve those priorities? They come back to the top and we get project charters. We launch them. They go down to line management for implementation as action plans. They come back for project review, and then they're in this execution phase. And so this is this consensus building process that occurs in a Hoshin Kanri system. And this is actually called Suriyawashi. And so we see this cascade of policy being interpreted, becoming objective and policy. So this is what people see in this cascading function. And so people mistakenly say that this is management by objectives, but it's not. It's what Drucker originally called management for results and self-control. So managing for results is, yes, having objectives that get results, but it's also including in it the concept of self-control. And that was dropped when it came into the Western world to describe this. So if we look at the content of the Kanri architecture, we start seeing there's this overall system, and that's the management system. And that's the culture of this organization. The strategic management system is the business system and cross-functional management. And we see that the business system has its own subcomponents, and the cross-functional management system is sharing that across the whole organization. Below that, we have Hoshin Tenkai. And Hoshin Tenkai is the deployment or the rollout of the policy action projects. So these are action plans that go in to change the daily management system. And then the toolkit that they use for applying it are the methods and tools and activities by which change is stimulated in that daily management system. So when we take a look at this, we see there's a vertical change process, and that is Hoshin Kanri. And that is driving organizational change. And those are change projects that transform daily work. Quality function deployment is changing the products and services. That is horizontal change. So we're changing by translating the voice of the customer about market features into the voice of the designer, the design functions, into the voice of the engineer, the technical drawings or algorithm structures, and to the voice of the process where the operational work is done. So together, they combine to facilitate company transformation. So it's not one or the other, but it's a both and situation and how they're built into the strategic choices that the organization's making. And when we see this, we start seeing that there is a process-specific model. So Hoshin Kanri is establishing the strategic intent, and that's about business excellence in the Western world. Kaizen Kanri is defining the projects that drive the change. And so here we have superimposed over this Kaizen Kanri change management the steps that are in a complete definition of a Six Sigma project. We're integrating this once we've got the improvement demonstrated and understand how to control it. We're integrating it into routine work in Nichijo Kanri, the daily management system, And then we're auditing work and maintaining standards with Kenshitsu Kanri, if you will, the quality control system. And so that is step by step making this improvement happen. And so what we see is there is a system of Kanri. So this whole thing, Zen Shiteki Henshitsu Kanri, that's company-wide quality control. And it has Hoshin Kanri at the top, cross-functional management, Kinobetsu Kanri, Kaizen Kanri, how we do improvement projects, Nichijo Kanri, how we do daily management, Hensitsu Kanri, how we check the daily management system, and then Jisu Kanri, how we manage ourselves, or the self-management system. So what we see is there's a couple of new things in there. So there's this concept of Jisuiken, which is the second set of eyes. So the fresh set of eyes is talking about a Jisuiken team. So we'll see the team activities, and I'll explain that in just a second. JKK is the concept of process ownership, and that means people have to take responsibility for the execution of quality work and how it's done in that organization. And finally, Jisu Kanri is a self-mastery management system where every worker is responsible for inspecting the quality of work coming to them, the quality of work they do, and the quality of the work that they pass on. And so this is basically a self-regulated or autonomous work management system that is occurring as a self-control mechanism in companies. So we say quality is everyone's business in this, and it's encouraging goodness and preventing the occurrence of badness. And we see at each of these levels, there's a different type of Jisuiken team. So we have cross-functional teams at the executive level, at Gemba 2, the management level, project teams, and at the work level, we have quality circles. And each of them has different tools and different ways for going to do the review process, from self-inspection to a Gemba walk to a presidential review. And each of them has a different focus in terms of their objectives, in terms of the quality emphasis they have, and in terms of the type of waste that they need to focus on for making improvements happen. And so if we think of this, how does this fit together in an overall system? Well, Kaizen projects, if you will, are like these green circles. They can be combinations of small individual groups or particular projects to improve areas or a implementation of a new software system or a new technology. So those are project change, but they are coordinated as a Hoshin project or activity that goes over multiple months and maybe in multiple areas, and that is this planning horizon for strategic change. We also see there's a long-term strategic plan horizon, and that's where we start talking about changing the organization. So if we're implementing change in work processes, we may be talking about changes happening between 3 months and 18 months. And so we have Hoshin projects going over a year sometimes in these companies. But if we have longer term projects, those are the projects that change the culture or change the fundamental technology of the organization. So for instance, if you take a look at how long was the Prius actually in development and the systems, when I talked to Horikiri-san about this, he said even the battery system was in development for 10 years before they launched the project. And that gives you an idea. It's not like the 3 to 5 year program that you'd have in U.S. automotive to get it out. As a matter of fact, Toyota has been experimenting with hydrogen cars already. They have working models developed, and they're not planning to release those until about 2040. So we see this long-term strategic planning horizon where we're changing technologies, changing cultures or way of looking at things. It's done in a much longer environment or stretch goal. And we start talking about what we need to do. Taiichi Ono says that he talked about this term fine adjustment. And he says it's a hidden meaning and it has to be understood. And what it means is not everything goes according to plan. And we shouldn't always stick to the plan. We shouldn't do always everything that makes good. But what we should do is change our processes so that our actions suit the situations and wait for the right opportunity. And he said the Toyota production system is still not perfect. More development is needed on fine adjustments. And the latest challenge in the Toyota production system, according to Shinichi Sakachi, board responsible for quality at Toyota, is called reinvigorating quality. And it's not like they haven't done it. They've been doing total quality. They won the Deming Prize in 1964. So we can clearly see they've been doing total quality for a long time. but they keep saying we have to keep emphasizing it. So it's just like safety. If we back off from it, we lose it. And so what we can see is in a conclusion here, Kaoru Ishikawa had a benediction for quality. And he said, quality development innovates to avoid a loss to society. So this was Ishikawa's hope and prayer for humanity. He said that quality and related activities be spread everywhere in the world, that quality all over the world be improved, that costs be lowered, productivity be increased, and that raw materials and energy be saved, that peoples all over the world be happy, and the world prosper and be peaceful. So this is inclusive action to result in good life and quality. So quality for humanity is a global social imperative. And I think we see this now as we're attacked by global problems like the coronavirus pandemic and the environmental condition of the world. So there's a couple of takeaway lessons we have from this. One is I want to tell you a story that Dr. Kano tells. And he talks about the way things actually work. And he says we have to be beware of purveyors of fourth generation sushi. So these are people who sell fourth generation sushi. So first generation sushi is prepared by a Japanese chef in Japan. Second generation sushi is prepared by a Japanese chef who migrates to America. Third generation sushi is prepared by an American chef in America. And fourth generation sushi is prepared by an American chef who goes to Japan but uses beef instead of fish. And this is a true story that is actually happening in terms of sushi. So we have to be careful that we do not lose the significant process information as we mature over time. So we have to make sure that we have to do not rush to oversimplify in this rush to improvement. We don't have to follow the old masters in exactly what they did, but we need to seek what they sought and understand what's the profound knowledge we need to develop. So critical takeaway observations is how did the Japanese concept of quality management evolve over this half century? Well, Japan treated quality as a science and constantly sought to take knowledge to the next level, building on the work of others to create a consensus understanding of the general principles. And then once the general principles were understood, there could be variation in how it's applied in different companies, sticking to those general rules. So what we've described in this webinar is how to describe quality from a scientific perspective. We've sought to understand the contributions of the various thought leaders over the last 70 years. We've sought to understand how the system of Kanri is designed and deployed in a Japanese organization to address this concept of company-wide engagement of everyone in the pursuit of quality as the objective to distinguish an organization. So thank you very much for listening. I believe we have some 10 minutes or so now available for questions.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Greg. Wanted to make sure that people had a chance to get questions in here. We got one right away. To what extent upper management gets involved in Kaizen, Kanri, et cetera? Can you phrase that? How upper management gets involved in that?
Well, the upper management involvement in Hoshin Kanri, that's establishing the long-term goals and plans of the organization, is a total senior management activity that will engage ideas from the organization, but they make the choice. A couple of years ago, I was in a plant at Komatsu, and we had the plant manager and also the head of quality for the plant. And one of my master black belts asked the plant manager, how do you get involved in Hoshin Kanri? And his answer was, what's that? And the corporate quality person said, in our companies, what we do is we decide where we put the resources for change over the long term, and we give the results of that as an action plan to the factory. So that becomes deployed to the factory manager as Kaizen Kanri. So at the executive level, about 70% of their job is figuring out what is the strategy to create the future we need to have. So Hoshin Kanri there at that top level, all the way down to deployment of action plans, is an executive management team. It's a Gemba 2, Gemba 3 type of job. Kaizen Kanri is the project or the action plan deployed into the organization. So it's already well formulated, and that is coming into the Gemba 1 workplace. remember that all projects in Japan are improvements scheduled to increase the value-adding work that's being done in Gemba 1. So that's where change is happening. It's to change the daily management system.
Okay, thank you. There was a question here about Kaizen, and this is a kind of a bug to me too. He says, I thought Kaizen was small incremental improvement, different from breakthrough improvement. Please clarify.
There is a difference between Kaizen, which is incremental improvement that happens in the daily management system, and Kaizen Kanri, which is when you're actually having improvement projects that are done. So, for instance, a Kaizen Kanri could be done within a functional area. So I might have Kaizen Kanri to improve how we manage suppliers, okay? So that is a focused system. It's not a Hoshin project. It's not changing the direction, but it's focused change within a particular functional area. And so Hoshin change is about integrating system-wide change. Kaizen Kanri is focused change in the organization. And then Kaizen activity itself is to improve for the better. And so those are the incremental activities. So what you're seeing is that there is this intermediate level, which is the action plans that are taken. And those action plans are basically coming from the middle of the organization to make changes happen.
Okay, thank you. That clears it up for me too. I hear people confused on that all the time. Another one here. Quality systems are interrelated concepts and practices. If you want to take an organization toward a coherent system, how can you do this one piece at a time?
I'm not exactly sure by what you mean by piece, but the components of a quality system need to begin with first the concept of culture, which is the hardest thing to change. So what is it that we honor in terms of our way of working? So those organizations that have had the most outstanding quality systems that I've seen, so Hewlett-Packard in the 80s, Toyota from the 70s, 80s, 90s, even today, Compaq Computer in the late 80s and early 90s, Nokia mobile phones in the mid 90s to late 90s, Xerox in the 80s to early 90s. Now, all of those organizations had very strong cultural components. From the management side, they also had well-structured concepts in terms of how you apply the culture in the organization. And then they had a coherent toolkit that they used. And the toolkit was not the driver. It was management's application of the toolkit to drive business change. So management could create a coherent view of where they're going and what they need to do to create the business that they want to be. And so this was all what you might call value-based change in the organization. So step by step, you can walk that process. And I think a big mistake that in the West we make is that we see the whole journey all at once and let's do it, let's have a plan for everything. That's not the way that when a company in Japan challenges a Deming Prize. They get a consultant, a Deming advisor from the Deming Committee, and they step-by-step guide them through. And so they don't get to go to the next step until they've mastered one step. And I remember Dr. Kano telling me a story that Dr. Akaho was helping a company, Seattle Pacific. And Seattle Pacific came and complained to Dr. Kano, says, that Yoji Akaho, keeps coming to us and telling us the same thing over and over again. And so Kano says, oh, I'll talk to Dr. Akaho. So he goes to talk to Dr. Akaho. He says, how's it going with Southern Pacific? And he says, I tell them to do the same thing over and over again, and they do nothing. So I'm not going to tell them the next step. So this is, I think, this system of actually making change happen means that we have an incremental revelation of where we're going. And that's when Miyamoto Musashi said, step by step, walk the 1,000-mile road. There's a discipline and a guidance that happens. And the architecture of a quality system has to unfold so that it's true to the culture of the organization. So when I consult with executive teams, I always say, let's build your quality system that fits you. Let's not take one off the shelf and say, use the Toyota system or something like this. Create the quality system that works for your organization, in your culture, and is anchored in your history and your past, so you can honor that as well.
Okay. We've got a couple of tough ones here, and we only have really time for one. The one question here is, so how has the Japanese culture itself affected implementing this methodology easier, make it easier to implement in Japan than the non-Japanese working environments? Are there aspects that made it easier to do this in Japan as opposed to elsewhere?
Actually, I'd say no. The number of excellent companies in Japan, I think, comes because there was a number of excellent guides and coaches to help them through it. When I take a look at the business leaders, so the Keidanran is the 400 leading companies in Japan. It's a business roundtable in Japan. They sit above JUICE and all these other organizations that are managing change. And so when they get consultancy, they're getting these people who studied these systems and how this all works together. They're getting a closed network of people. In the West, we buy a bunch of consultants from here or there, and they're pulling the organization every which way. So in the West, we have a fad, a new idea coming, and the fads compete with each other because people are competing for the money, the consulting fees that they get by helping a company. It's not so much that way in Japan, because there is more of a coherence about the methodology that you can actually allocate different instructors to go and help different companies. And they get the strength of that source. And I think this is something we miss in the U.S. We think, we have free enterprise, all consultants are equal. No, they're not. And I think that not too many consultants actually can lead system-wide change the way that it happens in the Japanese system. And so how we actually encourage change, how we engage organizations is different than Japan. And yes, they have a consensus-driven society. I understand that. We have a consensus-driven society where I live in Finland. And it's just as hard to implement here as it is in the U.S., these types of systems, because what we start having is we have this construct where we pull each other apart because of the different influences on the company and the thinking of the executive. There's much more consistency of that in Japan, and I believe that is the real difference.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Watson, for an extremely informative talk. So at this point, I think we're going to have to stop the recording. We will allow